3 cheers to Mr. Margaret's class for taking me up on my dance offer. You guys are awesome. My name is Jesse, and I am with Exploring by the Seat of Your Pants. For those of you joining us for the first time, we are all about bringing conservation, adventure, and science into classrooms around the world. And before we dive in with today's specific topic, I just want to say a huge thank you to all you classes live and on YouTube for joining us today. In 2021, we will have done over 600 live, free, interactive broadcasts, and it's so thrilling that we've had the chance to showcase that with classes around the world. So thank you for continuing to join us as we showcase and celebrate such amazing people and places around the globe. We've got a huge, great audience today. Some of our all-star favorite classes are with us, which is great. And we're diving in with a really epic presentation today. I'm very excited. This is a topic close to my own heart, and I hope you guys are all as enthusiastic as I am. Now, for some of our classes today, you will be familiar with Hilda and Sunniva. They have been joining us talking about their Hearts in the Ice expedition, bringing in amazing guest speakers from all across the globe over the last 2, 3 years, more than that, forever. Since I got involved with this, it's been great. They're like our most enthusiastic supporters and great programmers. It's always so nice to have them in. And so what I'm going to do is turn it over to Hilda and Sunniva to tell us a little bit about the amazing work that they do, and I'll leave it to them to introduce our special guest and our special topic after that. So ladies, thank you so much for joining us today. It's so nice to have you here with us.
Hey, super to see you again, Jesse. Thank you.
Nice to see you again. So tell us a little bit about your work and where we can guide kids to learn more, and I'll leave it to you to introduce Jon in just a minute.
Absolutely. Thanks a lot. It's amazing, and you're right about that, Jesse, that we're in our 3rd year. And Hilda, can you believe that we were able to reach 100,000 youth from around the world through Exploring by the Seat of Your Pants at Bumsaboo, and so that number is like ticking up. It's absolutely amazing. Yeah. You know what? We are really happy. We are in our 3rd year, and we're really happy to have our partner this month as Canada Goose, because their tagline could not be more appropriate. It's like, quote, working to keep the planet cold and people warm. And we're in our 3rd year of a relationship with them as our education partner, and it could not be more relevant to focus on polar bears because, you know, Hilda and I just came back from Scotland, where we both spoke on a panel at COP26 at the UN on the importance of polar education to understand climate change. And you know what? Polar bears are the iconic symbol of the Arctic, are they not? And most people won't, go there. But we've just finished our book. Just want everyone to know that. That's like one thing we've been doing. I know, amazing. And I just want to show you, here is, we have lots of really cool photos in the book. And we had more than 100 polar bear encounters at Bumsaboo. That was, for us, absolutely incredible. And the Arctic is changing. It's warming 3 times faster than anywhere else. So I'm super excited to have Jon Aars join us. And I'm going to turn it over to Hilda now. And I also want to shout out to Polar Bears International, because on our story maps page through Exploring by the Seat of Your Pants, we have a lot of really cool content for the kids to dive into on that page. And that content came from Polar Bears International. So thanks. And over to you, Hilda.
Yeah, thank you. Well, it's amazing being here again. And a year from now, Sunniva, we were back at Bumsaboo, and we were in contact with the Jon Aars that's on the call now, our experts, because we were so worried. We had a very mild winter, and we had little snow. We had some rain coming down. And right around now, the polar bear moms are going into dens to give birth around Christmas. So they should be in their dens now. And last winter, we were so worried about the polar bears, and we had to call Jon and ask him, how is this N26131, the one on the first page of our book, actually? And he could actually tell us. And I'm sure you can say something about, yeah, that's her. You can say something about that later, Jon, that she has a collar around her neck, and that is sending signals to Jon regarding where she moves and also her body temperature. And that's so interesting because her body temperature was lower than normal in her den, because the layer of snow in her den, her roof, was thinner last year than previous years. So amazing to have you on board, Jon, and we look so much forward to hear what you're going to tell all of us tonight.
Yeah. Sunniva, Hilda, thank you so much for that beautiful intro. And again, what a cool opportunity, not only to be able to be where you were at Bamsabu, but to have a polar bear expert to just ring up to ask about these stories.
Jon Aars, 911.
So Jon, come on in. Thank you so much for joining us today. And I'm so excited to hear from you and bring up your presentation.
Thank you.
All right. So yeah, feel free to roll right into it. I've got it up full screen for us, and we're so excited to learn from you all about polar bears.
Yeah. How do I start this? Just on the... No.
Yep, you're good
Yeah,
to go.
okay. I can't see any of you. I can only see my slides, but is that how it's going to be, I guess? Or
Yeah, we're going to be in the background just eating popcorn, excited about everything you're telling us today.
you are there, even though I don't see you, you are there.
We are.
That's good to know. Okay, I'll go with that then. I'll try to imagine if you look like you're following my talk or not. I guess I have about 10 minutes to tell you something about polar bears, and then I was told that you want to ask some questions probably afterwards.
Oh, so many questions. I've got questions myself. If our classes don't ask you any, don't worry, I'll be there for you.
Okay, I'll start. So I've worked with polar bears since 2003, and mainly up in Svalbard, which is the place where Hilde and Sunniva has been, so in Norwegian Arctic. So almost 20 years, I guess. We do a lot of studies on the bears to try to figure out a lot of different things. I'm not going to tell you all about it, but just give you a bit of insight about what we're doing. So first, I think, I'm not sure if you know or not, but I just want to tell you what a polar bear is, or at least which sort of size it is. A polar bear is one out of 8 different species we have of bears, and it's the biggest of all the bears. If you know about other mammals, I don't know if you do or not, I'm sure you know about cats and dogs, but the smallest mammal around is the shrew, and it's like the smallest shrews are like 3-4 grams. So an adult polar bear that might be 200 to 600 kilos is the same size as about 100,000 shrews. So then you know that. The biggest mammal we have is a blue whale, and that's about 500 times as big as a polar bear. So now you know approximately how big a polar bear is. The male is much bigger than the female, actually twice the size in weight. And the cubs are quite tiny when they get born. One very important thing about polar bears is that unlike all the other bears, they are marine mammals. So they live mostly on the sea ice. You see them on land as well, but if it wasn't for the sea, you wouldn't have polar bears. So they are adapted, as you say. The sea ice, the ice on the sea, is their main what you say habitat, main area where they live. Okay, so when we want to know more about polar bears, one thing we have to do, or one way to get a lot of knowledge about polar bears, is to be able to capture them, because then you can find out a lot of things. You can see if they survive from year to year, you can see if they have cubs, you can see if they're in good condition, and you can take, just as a doctor would do, a different sort of samples to figure out if they are doing well and so on. So that's what we do. And to capture a polar bear, you can't just go and capture it by your hands, because that could be dangerous. So we use a helicopter, and we use a rifle, and we dart the bear so it falls asleep, and then we handle it. In addition to a helicopter, if you want to start capturing polar bears, I would say you try to get a boat, because that's very useful. Then you can have somewhere where you can land, and you can have somewhere where you can get fuel for the helicopter. Because a helicopter can't fly more than 2-3 hours, and then it will crash if it doesn't get fuel. And you have somewhere you can go and eat. Okay, but before you do this work, before you capture the bears, you need to do a few things. So this is Magnus that I work with. He's mixing drug, so like something that you can give the bear to get them to sleep. Then you dart the bear, and to be able to know that that is the same bear you captured earlier in another year, we give them ear marks. we take a tiny tooth that is not used by the bear for anything. It's what's called a rudimentary tooth. So just as you have a small tail that you don't use for anything, I don't know if you know that you have one, but you do. They have this small tiny tooth, and you can slide it into tiny slices, and then you can read how old the polar bear is, just as you can with a tree that has grown for many years. And we take samples, tiny bit of fat, blood, milk, some hair, and then you get to know a lot about the bear. And you interview the bear to ask questions, about how he's doing and everything. And we measure the body weight, just lifting the bear. And finally, before we leave it, we write a small number on the bem of the bear, so we know that if we encounter him later that same year, that we don't want to capture him again, not before the year after. So this is 3 bears, and you can see here the darts that we give them to get them to fall asleep. So this is a mother with 2 big cubs. And then one thing that, as Hilde told you about, that have given us a lot of information is to put on those collars. So they tell you where the bear walks, if it's warm or cold, how much it moves, if it swims, and so on. So we do that with a lot of bears. And one of the more important things we've learned is that bears do very, very different things. So here you can see that we had one bear that for a whole year just uses a small place of Spitsbergen, the largest island on Svalbard. So this here down here is where Hilde and Sunniva has been living. And another bear that was captured a bit further south than that walked over to Asia and back to Russian Arctic up here. So like hundreds and hundreds of kilometers. This is a third bear that tried to go to the North Pole 3 years in a row. So they can walk really, really far. Then one thing we found out that we didn't know actually when I started working with polar bears is that they can swim several hundred kilometers without, cheating, just swimming continuously. And that can take up to several days. So this is also something that the collars tell us. We also learned how deep they can dive. So the collars can tell us that. And we see that many bears dive deeper than 10 meters. So that's quite impressive. 13 meters is the deepest we found. Why do they do this? They hunt seals. So here is a bearded seal. And they eat kelp that they find on the bottom of the ocean. One thing we found about those local bears is quite funny, I think. Because if you see those figure here, this figure, you have those areas here. That's where different bears have been. So they use different areas. And then this is all different bears. A is one bear, AA is another bear. But the A's are relatives, the B's and the C's, they are daughters or sisters, daughter, mother or sisters. And you see they use the same area as their sister or their mother. So some small areas, some big areas, but they use the same area. Okay, then polar bears, at some stage, they get old and then they often die, just as other mammals. And for polar bears, if they get much more than 20 years old, they are very old. So 32 years is the oldest bear ever been recorded in nature. So this female here was 26 years old when she died, very, very thin. The good thing, though, is that polar bears also get born. So, and they got born in, as he told, like in a den in the snow. So the mother makes this den. When the cubs get born, they are actually naked. So they could be very, very cold if it's outside. But inside this den is quite cozy and warm. Maybe 2, 3, 4, 5 degrees plus. What do polar bears eat? The main food for polar bears is seals. And it's like particularly 2 different species, bearded seal and ringed seal. Both of those seal species live where you have sea ice. So that's one reason why polar bears actually need sea ice. But polar bears, they are not picky at all. So they also look for other things to eat. They can hunt reindeer in Svalbard. Here is a reindeer that was taken by a polar bear just before we arrived. The small cubs also eat meat from their small, in addition to milk. This bear had killed a small whale. But other bears, they can also eat whales that are like up to 1 or 2 years old. And that could be big whales that are flashed, ashore. Polar bears also take birds and eggs in summer. They even eat plants. This polar bear here, which has also been in the area where Hilde and Sunniva has been living down here, every year she walks up to this island here, and there she actually hunt another species of seal that is not depending on sea ice, harbor seals, that is common further south, but they have a colony here. And for a week or two every year, that female here hunts up there. And then she eats birds here and hunt reindeer up here. Do the same every year. Okay, so why is warm weather bad for polar bears? I've already told you. They eat seals that are on the ice. So the main problem, of course, is that when you get warm weather, the sea ice starts melting and you get less and less sea ice. And actually, this is something I've seen in the 20 years I've been in Svalbard. It's much less sea ice now than it used to be only 20 years ago. And Svalbard is the area, or one of the areas in the Arctic where this has happened fastest. So in 30, 40 years, we now have like more than 3 months less where we have sea ice around Svalbard than we used to. So it's been a huge change. What else about bears? You might have heard that polar bears can actually be dangerous. I actually met a friend of mine some days ago here that visited, that got his finger bitten almost off by a polar bear half a year ago or something. So they can attack people and they can be dangerous. You don't want them into the settlements. So this female and mother, we moved away from Longyearbyen, the main settlement in Svalbard, 1.5 years ago. Here you see another bear up there that has been breaking into the cabins, and she didn't like the beds, so she just took out the mattresses and so on. And here is one bear that attacked a dog at the meteorological station in Svalbard. So they can be dangerous for humans, and humans, of course, can be dangerous for bears. That was what I had, and we have done this with some support from different organizations, Polar Bear International, that was mentioned, WWF, and Canon, that have given us cameras so we can take some of the pictures.
Fantastic. Jon, that was a marvelous presentation. What a great overview of polar bears, all the cool work going on up there. And again, anytime we can highlight the world's biggest land carnivore, it's a pretty special opportunity. So thank you so much for that. And I want to dive in with our questions. You'd ask for questions. We've got a whole whack of classes joining us on YouTube and a whole bunch more joining us live. So we're going to head to them. And again, classes, if you'd like to ask about polar bears, if you'd like to bring in any information about the Hearts of the Ice team and their Bombs to Amazing Cabin, if you guys did the research on that beforehand, we can take questions on all manner of things. We've got tons of time today, which is great. So Sunniva and Hilda, stay on the line. I'll make sure we get some questions for you guys too. But let's begin by going to Mr. Markwick's class. They're joining us today in lovely Sudbury, Ontario. We've had so many classes from Sudbury this year. Do you guys want to kick us off with a question? Come on in. Hey, guys.
Sure, thank you. You can hear us?
Yeah.
I can hear you, at least.
Yep, got Morgan here.
How many polar bears do you study in a year?
How many polar bears do you study in a year, Jon?
How many polar bears?
Do you study in a year? Every year, how many individuals are you studying or tranquilizing or what have you?
Yeah, it's when we are out every spring and try to capture the bears to study them, and it depends a lot on actually the weather, if we're able to fly a lot or not. But on average, about 70 bears every year.
Wow, that's more than I would have expected. See, one of the coolest jobs in the world. You get to go around and again, do all sorts of amazing work with these guys. How very cool. Let's head to Texas, San Antonio. In fact, Ms. Meinicke's class, if you guys want to come on in for a question, you are good to go. Hey, guys.
Oh, right here. Let's see. Okay. My name is Mason. My question is, when did polar bears first appear on Earth?
Yeah. How long have polar bears been around?
That is a very good question, and I have to say I've actually been on some papers that have discussed this, and I don't know actually still, even though I've told in some of those papers, because it is very difficult actually to prove how old polar bears are as a species. But I think most people think they are about 500,000 years old.
Wow.
But
That's it.
some people say that maybe you had polar bears even long before that,
Yeah.
and that the genetics has been difficult to study because brown bears and polar bears a lot of times have mated with each other. So
Yeah.
it could be that you had them 1 or 2 million years ago at two, but at least 400, 500,000, 600,000 years ago, you almost certainly had polar bears.
See, it's
And the
really
way it started was that some brown bear one day found that it was maybe boring on land or something, and just walked out on the ice and started doing something else, and found out that it's better to be white than brown if I want to do this.
So let that be a lesson, though. It's very cool, but kids, if you're bored, don't just go walking out on the ice. But it's fascinating to me. We get this question a lot about animals: is how long they've been around. And typically, humans are like the 200,000 for Homo sapiens is like the lowest bar level thing. Polar bears, I've never heard of an animal in all the conversations we've had that's been around that little amount of time. Usually, it's many millions of years. And so, what a great question, guys. Thanks, Mason. Let's head to Freehold, New Jersey. Miss Lackey Group, unmute your mic, guys. And come on in. Hi, fifth graders.
Hi, we actually have two questions here.
Let's
if you
do
don't
it.
mind. First, we have Aaliyah with her question.
How long can polar bears survive in the heat when the ice melts?
Yeah, and what's your second one? You can share them both at the same time.
How long can polar bears survive under the water?
Yeah, so perfect. And we'll come back for your third one a little later. So how long can they survive in the heat if it's really hot, and how long can they stay underwater when they're diving and swimming?
The first was, how long can they
survive the heat? So if it's really hot outside, how long can they live in that sort of condition?
I think it's quite hard question. I don't know exactly, but to put it that way, if it's very warm, they would overheat. So I don't think they would be okay for very long. But I don't know if they can survive, hours or days or whatever if it's very warm. But what I do know is that a polar bear could die within very short time if it overheats a lot. So if you follow a polar bear so it has to run at a very high speed, you can actually get that polar bear to get a heart attack or to die even within maybe 10, 15, 20 minutes.
Wow.
So they can overheat and die from overheating very, very fast.
Yeah.
But if they're outside and it's warm, they would try not to move and they would try to find somewhere it's cool.
Yeah.
But they would have a big problem if it was nowhere to hide.
Yeah. Sort of like the reverse of a situation of a lot of people. We get really, really cold. We need to get inside somewhere to get warm. Polar bears need to get cool, so they'll either seek out cold water or somewhere that they can shelter. Again, the conditions where a lot of polar bears are in the wild, at least very, very seldom get to a level of heat that would be potentially lethal to them. You have polar bears in zoos, and we've talked about this a lot in the past, is that they can be sometimes in conditions in habitats and climates where they get warmer than they normally would. So a lot of investment is done to make sure that they're as cool as possible, because that's a really big issue for them. Jon, quick follow-up before we head to Sunniva, who's got a question for you. So how long can they stay underwater? They're known as the sea bear. I know that they can go for swimming for long distances. How long can they hold their breath?
There was one paper a couple of years ago where somebody had observed or filmed a bear, and I think it was underneath the water for 2 or 3 minutes. But I'm fairly sure they can stay longer than that if they want to.
Yeah.
So I think they can stay many minutes if they need to or want to.
We'll practice holding our breaths together at the end of the program. We can see if we can pull off the polar bear thing. Thanks, Jon. Let's head to Sunniva. She's got a question for you. What do you want to ask?
Well, it's interesting. When we were at Bumsaboo, we used a drone for a lot of surface temperature changes over time. And this was from BCIT in British Columbia. And Eric Saksuk mentioned to us that it's possible that drone technology could be helpful for polar bear observation, maybe as a non-invasive way to actually dart them instead of a helicopter. Do you think this is something that could be possible in the future?
To actually physically dart a bear from a drone?
Yeah.
Maybe. But one thing when you use a helicopter, and maybe you could do the same with a drone. I don't know, but one thing is that it's very important that you are able to steer the bear all the time, so you avoid any sort of accidents where a bear jump into the water or something like that. Yeah. So even though a drone could be less invasive, you want to be sure that you can scare the bear away from danger. So that is one problem I could see.
Yeah, interesting. Thank you.
Thank you for the question. No, I find this fascinating. And I mean, when it comes to conservation, it's funny. I certainly, people in my life, my family, friends, think of darting as just the easiest thing. Oh, go out and tranquilize it. Oh, there's a problem coyote in the area, tranquilize it. It's not necessarily as easy as that. There are a lot of considerations. And so I'm glad you brought up that point. I think that's really important for our classes today. Let's head to Mr. Botches and Ms. McNamara's next, and then we'll take a few questions from YouTube to keep the fun going. So come on in Toronto, guys, and take us away. Hey, guys.
Yes, Bridget, with the question.
Why did you decide to study about polar bears?
Yeah, Jon, why do this? What's the allure of polar bears?
What is?
Why did you choose to study polar bears? Like, is there a specific reason? Did you just always love them, or did you fall into this? How did you end up with this career?
No, it's just because I didn't get any other job, actually. So I was interested in biology. I wanted to study birds, but then when I was to take a master, somebody else took that thesis I hoped to get. So I started with small mammals, with mice or voles, small rodents. And then after that, I just applied for different jobs, and that was the job I got.
My favorite reaction of anyone in the background was Hilda there. So Hilda, you called the guy who he just fell into it. There was nothing else.
I have to comment on this one because, I mean, you are one of the best in the world. So thankfully, you ended up with polar bears. That's great. Great for us and great for the polar bears.
I was going to say, for a person who fell into a role, here you are as the world expert with dozens of classes around the globe. So it paid off. We're really happy you're in this position, but that's a great answer.
I have one more question for Jon, if I may. And Jon, when COVID hit, it was very difficult for people to get into the field. Yeah. And I know that we had the fortunate pleasure of being able to call you on a satellite phone and assist in locating N26131. My question is, if you're missing a year's worth of data, how valuable is that for researchers? If, for example, you go 1 year and you're not able to collect data?
Then all sort of data is useful. So to get information like I got is actually very valuable. Of course, you don't get as much information that way as you would being in the field yourself for a whole month. But it's very valuable to know, and quite a lot of the data we have is from observations like that. That we know maybe that we have a female there and there and there, but we don't know if she had cubs or not. We don't know the health and so on. So all this, it's like a puzzle. So to get information from all different sources is useful.
Thanks.
So that we appreciate a lot.
Yeah, it's a great question. It's one of our biggest ones we've had all year in conservation is how has COVID affected it? And so I'm really glad we got that one. So I appreciate that. Ms. McNamara's class, we're going to come to you guys next. Joining us today in Svalbard Beach. Oh, it's been so long since I've been to Svalbard Beach. Unmute your mic. Come on in, guys. Hey, grade fours. Hi, everybody.
Say hello. We have a question from Brody. He wants to know, what does it feel like to be right next to a polar bear?
Yeah.
It does feel special. They're like majestic animals, but as with everything else, it also, if it's something you do a lot, you sort of get used to it. So you maybe don't think about it the same way all the time. When you have captured the first 500 bears or something, then it's a bit different to take number 501 than it was to take number 1 and 2. but it is special. I find it more special today to see a polar bear that walks past me that is not sedated than to sit beside the bear and be able to touch it.
Yeah. Jon, you're in a very lucky position where you've been close to 500 polar bears. I have to say, this year in August, I went into Churchill, Manitoba, saw my first polar bear in the wild. And it was my first one, and it was unbelievable. It's just incredible to see. So, a great question, guys. Honestly, the questions we're getting on YouTube as well are just amazing. So what we're going to do now, folks, is I'm going to take some questions from our YouTube viewers, and then I'll come back to all our live classes for another round. And so, Kelly and Justin, American Idol flashback for me. 5th graders from Morristown, New Jersey. They want to know, how many cubs does the average polar bear have, Jon?
So most polar bears have 2 cubs, and they get born in midwinter. But then very often one cub dies at some stage. So, for example, in Svalbard, when they leave the den in early April, about 1/3 of the females have only 1 cub. But I think almost all of them had 2 when they get born. And in some cases, they have 3.
Yeah. I was going to say, I think I've seen like 1 picture ever with 3, but if you watch natural history documentaries for any of our classes, you'll almost always see the 2, at least when they're really young. And again, as you mentioned, sometimes only 1 will survive, but great question, guys. All right, let's head to Mr. Pettix's class. You guys have asked so many questions from California today. Which one? We're talking about polar bears in Norway today. Brody wants to know, where else do polar bears live in the world?
So just only in Arctic, in the far north, and only where you have sea ice at least part of the year. But in countries, it's like in Arctic Canada, in Greenland, in Arctic Norway, and in Arctic Russia, and in Alaska.
Yeah. We've you mentioned Polar Bears International. Son and Hilda mentioned them as well. So we regularly feature the Polar Bears International team talking about the Canadian polar bears. And I think for our Canadian classes today, most of you are more likely to end up seeing them in Canada than you are somewhere like Svalbard. Svalbard is extraordinary, can be expensive to get to. If you get the chance to go, absolutely please do in your life. But right here in Canada, you can get up and see polar bears. They're not too far away from Winnipeg if you ever get the chance. It's a really special opportunity. All right, one more from YouTube. Alex in Miss Bondi Heron's class is curious if a polar bear has ever tried to attack or ever actually attacked you. And Cinna Van Hilda, I'll bring you two in as well. Any polar bear attacks or near polar bear attacks, everybody?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, well, we had more than 100 polar bear encounters, and we had a few of them right at our door. We were actually a couple of times, yeah, it was knocking on our door, and one times the polar bear had got some food from Etra. We were so careful with our food. So this was a mistake from us the last week we were there. And this was was it 53, I think, Jon? And he was, Jon had just seduced or had done some research on him the month before, and he was 550 kilos. He was fat, and he was 20 years old. And so that was an easy encounter. He was 50 centimeters, half a meter away from us. But we also had some really a little tougher ones during the dark season. But we were very careful, and we had Etra, the dog that barked, and yeah. So we had Sunniva also came out of the hut, and they were right there.
Yeah,
so,
you know, it's interesting because somebody asked what does it feel like to be next to a polar bear, and when I opened the door and he came around the corner, it felt like a minute of eye contact, but it was clearly under a split second. Yeah. But that moment of looking at this voluminous, this large, huge marine mammal right in front of you, it's both terrifying and beautiful. You know, it's because you're standing in the presence of something that has such magnificent speed and force. And then it also just looks so beautiful, like so perfect in the Arctic. So it was really a moving experience.
Yeah. Jon, how about you? You've been beside them a lot, but sedated, as you mentioned. Have you ever had a situation where a polar bear nearly attacked you?
Only once. I've met a lot of polar bears, and most of the time I find they are quite careful and try to stay away. We had one that was a young bear, and that's quite typical in the camp we were, and almost out of nothing. I thought it was just like walking around and not doing anything, and suddenly it just ran against us. But that one stopped when we have this sort of trip wire. So it's like a thin metal thread. And when they go through that, it makes a large and a flash. And that stopped the bear when it was 16 meters away from me.
Yeah.
And we got to scare him away.
You've mentioned, Hilda, instead of mentioned having a dog, you mentioned these deterrents. When a lot of people do research in the Arctic, when polar bears could potentially be a threat, usually there's rifles involved, not to hopefully shoot the polar bear, but to have it as a deterrent if absolutely necessary as a last resort. Talk about deterrence, and I think this is really important. It's one of the only places in the world where we're actively back on the food chain potentially. And so, again, that sort of preparatory work is so integral to this sort of work. And I think that's an important message for all our classes today, is that, it's not dangerous. It's just a situation where you need to show a lot of respect and you need to know what you're doing and have that preparation ahead of time. So great question, guys. Quick note, I was at the Toronto Zoo. I know we've got some folks in Toronto today. They have a polar bear exhibit there. And I looked through the glass and there was no polar bear. And I looked away and I looked back and the bear was right at the window. That is a shocking experience. Even though we have glass between, that is truly, like, there's nothing quite like that. They're a very unique, powerful animal. Guys, we're going to head to our live classes for another round. We're ripping through these. This is great. So Mr. Markwick, come on in, guys, if you have another question for us. Hey. Yeah, you're good to go. Oh, your mic isn't working. I don't know why. That's really odd. No, you're unmuted. It should be working. Play around with it. I'll come back in a minute. In worst case, you can type it in the chat, okay? Good luck. Miss Meinecke's group, we'll come to you guys first. Hey, guys.
Hey, we are super excited. We just learned about your Arctic seed vault, and my students have a question.
I have a question. How long can a polar bear survive without eating?
Yeah.
That's a very good question. I don't know any other mammal that can survive for as long as a polar bear without eating. So they often, when a female go into den and give birth, they might often be 4 or 5 months without eating anything. And the most extreme is in Canada, I think, in Hudson Bay, where they can be up to 8 months, some of the females, without eating anything.
That's wild. I mean, the only other animals we've ever featured on this broadcast that are like that are like snakes, things like big reptiles where they can go many months, if not years, regularly. But that is an unbelievable fact. I mean, as humans, we can go, I think the record's like in 10 plus days, maybe 20 tops. You have to have water that whole time. But for a bear to have that level of metabolism, bears in general are wild. Great question. Mr. Markwick, so I'm going to come back to you guys in a minute. I want to see if you can share it in the chat, worst case scenario. What I'll do now is head to Freehold for our New Jersey classes. Unmute your mic, and you're good to go. Hey, guys.
All right, you want to go ahead, ask your question?
What is a polar bear's strongest sense?
Strongest sense. Are they best at smell? Do they have great vision? How do they sense the world, Jon?
So the nose of the polar bear is the best tool they have. So they have an okay eyesight. They can hear okay, but not exceptional. But they can use the nose to smell something far, far away. So even better than a dog, I would say. Hundreds of meters away, they can smell a seal, for example.
Yeah. And I mean, this isn't just a seal that's like, sunning itself, wafting its odors out to the world. This can be something that's under the ice or has a den. I mean, if you watch polar bear footage of them hunting, it's wild to see this animal track down in a beeline towards something that it can eat that, no human would ever be able to find. They're just incredible hunters and amazing animals. Mr. Markwick, thank you for sharing. I'm going to bring you in. Hopefully your audio works now. Let's see. No. So welcome in. Thank you for sharing, guys. How are bears dying from the shrinking sea ice? So why is that affecting them, Jon?
Yeah, so even though they can be, half a year without eating, they still need food. So if a bear is to survive, it means that if you should be able to starve for half a year, it means that you would need to have eaten a lot beforehand, so you have a lot of fat reserves. And they have to go in plus, they have to gain more over time than they lose. So if they don't get enough to eat, they will die. You can be half a year without food, but if you're 1 year without food, you're not going to make it.
Yeah.
And for the mothers to be able to raise cubs, they also need to have quite a lot of fat on the body. They need to eat quite a lot. So the less sea ice, the more challenging and difficult it is for them to find seals to eat.
Yeah. We're here in Canada, we're in the US, we're in Norway, we're in places where food security is not that much of an issue. Most of us can go to a grocery store, we can get food very easily. For most animals and for a lot of people on this planet, food is the essential issue. And so the shrinking sea ice is ultimately leads to just lower food supply. And I think that's a really important message just generally for our classes today about conservation efforts around the globe. Guys, we have time for 2 more questions. Time flies when you're having fun, Jon. This has been so much, so exciting. Mr. Boccia's class, and then we'll wrap up with Ms. McNamara's in a minute. For our folks on YouTube, there's more questions than we could possibly answer in one broadcast. I encourage you to check out the Norwegian Polar Institute, Polar Bears International, heartsintheice.com, and so much more for great information if you don't get your question answered today. But Mr. Boccia, come on in. Hey, guys.
Hi, is it possible to, for polar bears to adapt to a new habitat?
Yeah. So, Jon, can they change their ways and get ready for the changing world or not?
So they are very good at doing the best out of the situation, but they are, I think, still dependent on sea ice. So if you have no sea ice, I don't think you will have polar bears. And the reason I say so is that you don't find polar bears anywhere in the world where you don't have sea ice for at least part of the year. And I think that shows if they were able to adapt to places without sea ice, I think they would already be there, So they are able to do okay in some places when you get less sea ice than you have today. But I don't think they will be able to make it if you have absolutely no sea ice.
Well, it just underscores the call to action, the importance of things like COP26, where people are working on trying to, make sure that we have a future with sea ice. You mentioned that they only came into existence in the last few 100,000 years, if not the low millions, to exploit that whole area. No bears could survive in that habitat. Polar bears evolved to be able to do so. And so it's really integral that we maintain that habitat and do everything we can to make sure that there is that sea ice future for them. Recent documentary highlighting polar bears trying to, eat walruses, and the walruses aren't really fond of that idea. So you can exploit other food niches in the world, but it is very tricky. That's the big problem with climate change, is not that it's happening necessarily, it's that it's happening so fast, faster than animals are able to adapt and change their strategies to make a living. So it's a dark story, but I think it's an important one. And so great question, guys. Ms. McNamara's class, your camera and mic are off. If you are good to go, please turn those on, and I'll come to check in with you guys in a second. If not, I want to spend just a quick second highlighting the Norwegian Polar Institute. I encourage everyone to check out their website, see more about Jon's work and the team there. And of course, our wonderful team at Hearts in the Ice. So Sunniva and Hilda, I'm going to bring up your Facebook, Instagram pages. You guys can use hashtag Hearts in the Ice, hashtag Bamsabu, some amazing resources to keep the learning going there. And I just want to thank all 3 of you for this amazing program. Jon, thank you so much for joining us. Such a pleasure today, and inspired so many kids. Hilda and Sunniva, you'll be back soon, next week probably.
Well, actually, yes. Yeah, I do want to mention this because on Monday, we have one more hosted call with you. And as part of Canada Goose's program this month, and it's with Stephanie Penk and Louise Archer. So Monday at 12 Eastern, maybe all the classrooms on the call can rejoin, and they're going to dive into how important sea ice is to polar bear populations. So ties right into where we ended today.
Yeah, and I want to shout out to all the kids today and all the fantastic questions. I mean, it's amazing. Thank you so much. I mean, even questions that's hard for an expert to answer. So stay in school, stay curious, and maybe become a citizen science or maybe a polar bear researcher.
This has been a really special session. Again, classes all over Canada and the US, more questions than we could possibly answer. Jon, you're new to this, but what we do to end every broadcast, I'm going to bring in all our classes to say a big thank you and goodbye. So Mr. Markwick, Ms. Meineke, our new Freehold team, Mr. Bocci, and Ms. McNamara, thank you guys so much. Have a wonderful day, everyone. Enjoy.